was only 24, too young for absolute power, too young for an empire that stretched farther than he could see. The people loved him anyway. They remembered his father, a war hero, a soldier who marched with them. They remembered the boy, too, small boots, walking beside the army. They called him Caligula. Little Boots. Years later, that boy stepped onto a balcony, and Rome held its breath. Below him, thousands waited, not in fear, in hope. He smiled, he waved, he looked gentle, almost shy. For a moment, the empire felt safe again. Taxes were lowered, prisoners were released, crowds cheered in the streets. People said he would be different, kinder, more human. Some even called him the perfect emperor. But power is quiet at first. It doesn't shout. It sits beside you and waits. Inside the palace, the marble halls echoed with footsteps. Servants bowed lower than before. Guards watched him more carefully. Because now, every word mattered. Every glance meant something. Every silence felt heavier. He stood alone one morning, looking over Rome. The city glittered in the sun. So much power. So much expectation. And no one above him. Not anymore. Some men grow into power. Some men are shaped by it. And some are slowly consumed. Rome didn't know the difference yet. They only saw a young ruler, a hopeful smile, a peaceful beginning. But history rarely begins with chaos. It begins with calm, with trust, with applause. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous moment of all. They saw a young emperor, a calm smile, a hopeful beginning. And then he disappeared. Not from the throne, not from power, but from the world outside his doors. Caligula stopped appearing in public. The balcony stayed empty. The cheers faded. Inside the palace, the lights burned through the night. Servants moved quickly. Doctors whispered. Guards spoke in low voices. Something was wrong. He lay in bed, sweating, shaking, barely conscious. The man who held Rome couldn't even stand. People waited, at first patiently, then nervously. Rumors spread through the streets. Some said poison. Some said fever. Some said the gods were angry. But no one really knew. They only knew this. The empire suddenly felt fragile again. Crowds gathered at temples. Candles flickered in the dark. Voices prayed for a man they barely knew, but desperately needed. Because hope had a face now, and that face was fading. Days passed, slow, heavy, uncertain. Inside the palace, silence grew louder. Every breath mattered. Every hour felt borrowed. Then he opened his eyes. Relief moved through Rome like wind. The emperor lived. The future was safe again. But something had changed. The smile didn't return the same way. The warmth felt thinner. The pauses lasted longer. People noticed. But no one spoke. Because survival looks like victory, even when something is broken. He walked again. He spoke again. He ruled again. Yet the air around him felt different, colder, sharper. Sometimes illness leaves the body, but not the mind. Rome celebrated his recovery. They believed the danger had passed. They didn't ask what came back with him. And sometimes, that's when the real story begins. He came back, but not entirely. The body recovered. The silence didn't. Caligula walked the halls again. Servants bowed. Guards stepped aside. Everything looked normal. But normal felt different. He paused longer when people spoke. He smiled at things no one else noticed. Sometimes he laughed alone. The first order sounded harmless, a celebration, more games, more shows for the people. Rome loved that. Crowds filled the streets again. Music echoed through the city. The emperor was generous. Then came another order. More gold, more statues, more monuments in his name. The treasury began to thin, quietly, almost politely. No one objected, because he was still the young emperor they believed in, still the survivor, still the hope. But the requests didn't stop. He demanded bridges built across water, just to walk across them. Ships lined the sea like floating roads. Soldiers watched, confused, silent. The cost didn't seem to matter. The purpose didn't seem to exist. Only the order mattered. Some men obey out of duty. Some obey out of fear. And some obey because they don't know what else to do. Inside the Senate, conversations became careful, words chosen slowly, eyes avoided. Because questioning him felt dangerous, even when nothing made sense. He began to speak differently, too, less like a ruler, more like someone performing. He talked about greatness, about destiny, about being chosen. Chosen by whom? He never said. Rome watched, still hopeful, still uncertain. After all, he had survived death. Maybe this was wisdom. Maybe this was vision. Or maybe something else had taken its place. The orders kept coming, stranger each time, and no one knew where they would lead. They stopped laughing first. The servants, the guards, the men who stood closest to him. Something in the palace had shifted. Not loud, not sudden, just colder. Caligula still gave orders, still walked the marble halls, still smiled when people bowed. But now, people bowed longer. A joke at dinner ended too quickly. A glance lasted too long. Silence filled the spaces in between. He began testing people, small things, strange things. He would praise a man, then stare at him without speaking, waiting, watching. No one knew the correct response. Some smiled, some froze, some spoke and regretted it. One morning, a senator didn't appear. No announcement, no explanation. His seat stayed empty, and no one asked why. Another day, a name was whispered. A friend, a relative, someone close to the emperor. Gone. The palace learned quickly. Questions were dangerous. Memory was dangerous. Even sympathy was dangerous. Caligula seemed calmer during these moments, almost thoughtful, as if fear itself interested him. He watched people carefully, how they stood, how they breathed, how quickly they agreed. Power had changed shape. It wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be. Because fear does the talking. Fear does the obeying. Fear does the silence. Inside the Senate, voices softened. Inside the palace, footsteps slowed. Inside Rome, whispers replaced applause. No one knew the rules anymore, only the consequences. And when consequences are unclear, obedience becomes instinct. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't declared terror. But the fear was there, growing, spreading, like something invisible. And once fear settles in a palace, it rarely stays contained. They obeyed him. That was the rule now. Not respect, not loyalty, just obedience. Caligula noticed. He watched how quickly they agreed, how deeply they bowed, how carefully they chose their words. And then he pushed further. At first it felt like theater. Dinner invitations, lavish halls, tables covered in gold and wine. Senators arrived dressed in their finest. They expected conversation, policy, something meaningful. Instead, he made them wait. Hours passed. Food grew cold. Servants stood frozen. Then he entered, laughing, relaxed, as if nothing mattered. He spoke about himself, his greatness, his destiny. The room nodded, every head, every time. Some men laughed too loudly. Some clapped too quickly. Fear had turned into performance. He began calling them by names, not titles, not honors, names that sounded smaller. The most powerful men in Rome, reduced to spectators. One night he placed them beside entertainers, actors, dancers, mocking the difference. Another time he ordered them to run, not for war, not for duty, just for his amusement. They ran. Slowly, awkwardly, in silence. Rome's leaders running for a single man's laughter. Humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it applauds. And the more they accepted it, the easier it became. Because dignity requires resistance, and resistance requires courage. Inside that hall, courage was gone. They told themselves it was temporary, just mood, just stress, just recovery. But each moment chipped away at something older, something Roman. Respect, tradition, pride. Caligula watched it happen, almost curious. Not just ruling Rome, but bending it. And once a ruler learns that power can humiliate, what stops him from going further? They thought they had seen everything, The laughter, the waiting, the quiet humiliation. They were wrong. Caligula found comfort somewhere unexpected, not in advisors, not in generals, but in a horse. Incitatus. White, tall, perfectly groomed. The emperor visited him often, more often than he visited the Senate. Servants noticed first. The stable grew larger. Marble floors replaced dirt. Gold decorations appeared. The horse slept better than most men in Rome. People whispered, carefully, quietly. They told themselves it was harmless. A ruler with an unusual affection. Nothing more. Then came the invitations. Guests arrived expecting another banquet, another performance, another test. Instead, they found the horse. Decorated, presented, almost introduced. Caligula smiled proudly. He spoke about loyalty, about purity, about trust. Qualities he admired, qualities he struggled to find in people. Some laughed, softly, nervously, then stopped. Because he wasn't joking. He suggested honors, titles, a place among Rome's leaders. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared. The idea hung in the air, absurd, impossible, yet somehow real. A horse in the Senate. Was it madness? Was it mockery? Was it a test? Or was he saying something else about the men already sitting there? Fear makes strange things believable. Silence makes them possible. And the room stayed silent. They had accepted humiliation. They had accepted confusion. Now they were asked to accept the unbelievable. Caligula stroked the horse calmly, almost gently, as if this made perfect sense. Rome watched its emperor and wondered if he had lost respect for them, or lost something else entirely. Men stopped speaking when he walked by, not out of respect, out of survival. A guard at the palace door kept his eyes down. He had seen too much already. Friends promoted in the morning, executed by night. No warning, no explanation, just silence after. Inside the halls, senators moved carefully. They laughed when Caligula laughed. They clapped before he finished speaking. They agreed before they understood. Fear made them fast learners. But fear does something else. It makes people listen. It makes them notice who else is afraid. A glance held half a second too long. A whisper in a corner. A hand that didn't tremble anymore. Small things. Dangerous things. Cassius Chaerea felt it first. A soldier, mocked by the emperor, humiliated in front of others, given insulting passwords, called weak, called useless, again and again. He laughed with everyone else. He bowed. He obeyed. But something inside him hardened. Others felt it too. Men who once believed loyalty meant safety. Men who watched Rome become a stage, and themselves the audience. They didn't talk openly. They didn't need to. Fear created its own language. A nod, A pause. A door closed quietly. A meeting that looked accidental. Each man asked the same question. Not out loud, only in his head. How long can this continue? And who stops him? The risk was obvious. Failure meant death. Not just for them, for their families, their names erased. But doing nothing felt worse. Because every day Caligula grew bolder, more unpredictable, more dangerous. And slowly, the silence inside the palace changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. A guard waited in the corridor. He knew the plan, but knowing didn't make it easier. Cassius Chaerea stood nearby. Calm on the outside, storm inside. This wasn't just rebellion. It was treason. One wrong second, and they all died. Caligula walked toward them laughing. He had just left a performance, still smiling, still careless, still untouchable. Or so he believed. The hallway felt narrow, too quiet, too final. Chaerea stepped forward. The emperor recognized him. Another joke coming, another insult ready. The first strike came fast, not dramatic, not heroic, just sudden. Confusion replaced arrogance. Guards froze. Some ran. Others joined. Steel flashed. Voices shouted. Footsteps echoed. And then it was over. The emperor who terrified Rome lay silent on the ground. No speech, no command, no laughter. The conspirators stood breathing hard. Victory didn't feel like victory, only relief, and something heavier. Because they hadn't just killed a tyrant, they had killed an emperor. Rome was safe. Maybe. But a new question filled the air. If one ruler could fall like this, what came next? A servant opened a door carefully. He expected shouting, orders, chaos. Instead, silence. The palace felt different, lighter, but also dangerous, because no one knew who was in charge. Some senators smiled quietly, too quickly, too confidently. They spoke of restoring the republic, of freedom, of dignity. But soldiers didn't celebrate. They remembered something else. Power doesn't stay empty for long. In a hidden room, a frightened man trembled. Claudius. An unlikely figure, ignored, overlooked. Alive. The guards found him. Not as a victim, as a solution. By nightfall, Rome had another emperor. Not chosen by the people, not chosen by the Senate, chosen by fear. Again. Caligula's name didn't disappear. It lingered, in whispers, in warnings, in stories told carefully. Some said he was mad. Others said power made him that way. No one fully agreed. But everyone remembered the feeling, how fast admiration became terror, how silence became survival. And one question remained, long after the blood was gone. Was Caligula the exception or the warning?